Jesus has been gone for a very long time, and the longer he delays, the harder it is to stay focused, keep the faith, and not lose hope. In the meantime, while we wait, some of us study the Scriptures seeking clues as to when we might expect his arrival. We long for his return, and so while we wait in eager expectation, we pass the time in Bible study, prayer, and conversation, reminding each other of the truth, including the gospel. Sometimes we forget the caution Jesus gave when he pointed out that no man can know the day or the hour, not even the Son of Man, which is why he exhorts his followers to remain alert, sober, and braced against the trials of faith coming our way. Be watchful, vigilant, and observant, rather than careless, lax, and lenient. Does the Bible reveal the times and epochs? Is it left up to us to figure things out? Do we really need such knowledge in order to survive what is about to come upon the world? In this third part of our three-part series entitled Noah and Lot, a Retrospective, we are going to explore this question and much more. Stay tuned. We have been looking at Luke chapter 17, wherein Jesus gives a brief dissertation on his prophecies concerning the end times, describing the conditions and situations surrounding the coming days of the Son of Man. At the very end of his discourse, he describes an incident where various people are taken away while others are left behind. I tell you, on that night there will be two in one bed. One will be taken, the other will be left. There will be two women grinding at the same place. One will be taken, and the other will be left. Two men will be in the field. One will be taken, the other will be left. In answering, they said to him, "Where, Lord?" And he said to them, "Where the body is, there also the vultures will be gathered." Earlier in chapter 17, Jesus employed both Noah's flood and the destruction of Sodom in order to strongly caution his disciples about an existential crisis they may face in the future. He warns them, "On that day, the one who's on the housetop and whose goods are in the house must not go down to take them out. And likewise, the one who is in the field must not turn back." One of these days, you might face a decision whether or not to abandon your goods. Be smart. Leave everything behind. Nonetheless, in our passage here, the chosen will have no warning to obey. The decision regarding who will stay and who will leave is left up to others. Whether a particular man stays or leaves, whether a particular woman stays or leaves, the decision is out of their hands. No condition or state of affairs alerts them of this singular moment. The men are sleeping, the women are working. No impending disaster compels them to make a decision. In simple terms, one is taken and one is left. In Matthew's record of Jesus' discourse toward the end, Jesus presses his strong counsel to remain alert at all times. Jesus is going away for a long time, which will require patient endurance and unending vigilance while he is away. In that context, he tells a series of parables. One parable tells the story of a slave who adopted a disrespectful and lazy attitude while his master was away. A vice of servants in everywhere is eye service, the conduct of slaves who work only when they are watched, and whose motive, therefore, is not fidelity to duty, but fear of punishment. Supposing that his master will be gone a long time, his slave beats his fellow servants, mistreating them. When the master of that slave came back unexpectedly, he cut that slave to pieces and assigned him a place with the hypocrites. Next, he tells a story about 10 virgins, 5 wise and 5 foolish. The 5 wise virgins were prepared for a long delay of the bridegroom, but the 5 foolish virgins were not. Because the 5 foolish virgins were unprepared to remain in the wedding procession, they missed the arrival of the bridegroom and did not travel with him to the wedding reception, and they were not allowed inside once the door was shut. The moral of the story is, be on the alert then, for you do not know the the day or the hour. Ironically, those who are taken in the rapture are, at the same time, those who are warned to stay alert. Two men are sleeping, one is taken, the other left. Neither one of the men are alert at the moment when one is taken. No warning sound can be heard. No sense of alarm or danger is evident. At this particular moment, the chosen have no warning to obey. This gives us a hint as to the criteria the angels will use during the sorting process. Jesus must be speaking about a different kind of awareness. Those who will be taken and rescued are those with a particular philosophy of life, who remain guarded, watchful, and vigilant. They don't waste time getting drunk at night. They attend church, study the Bible, sing hymns, feed the poor and hungry, help the orphan and the widow, and visit a believer in prison. They remind each other of what is true, they strengthen each other in the faith, and they give hope to those on the verge of despair. In Paul's first letter to the Thessalonian church, he teaches that those in Christ will be caught up together to meet the Lord in the air. Before this incident happens, there will come a series of events that lead up to that moment, including the apostasy and the short reign of the Antichrist. In the next chapter, Paul will refer to his teaching concerning the foreseen events, which are to take place just prior to the day of the Lord and the second advent. He refers to the coming geopolitical and sociological milieu as times and epochs in this text. Now, as to the times and the epochs, brethren, you have no need of anything to be written to you. For you yourselves know full well that the day of the Lord will come just like a thief in the night. While they are saying, peace and safety, then destruction will come upon them suddenly, like labor pains upon a woman with child, and they will not escape. But you, brethren, are not in darkness, that the day would overtake you like a thief. For you are all sons of light and sons of day. We are not of night nor of darkness, so let us not sleep as others do, but let us be alert and sober. For those who sleep do their sleeping at night, and those who get drunk at night. But since we are of the day, let us be sober, having put on the breastplate of faith and love, and as a helmet the hope of salvation. For God has not destined us for wrath, but for obtaining salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ, who died for us, so that whether we are awake or asleep, we will live together with him. Therefore, encourage one another and build up one another, just as you also are doing. With regard to the times and epochs, Paul says, you have no need of anything to be written to you. Why does he say that? Did he already give them an exhaustive teaching on the subject last time he saw them? Do the scriptures already contain all the information they needed? I don't think so. After all, we know from Paul's first letter to the Thessalonians that the church had no idea about the rapture of the church and why they needed not grieve as the Gentiles do. We know from his second letter to the Thessalonians that some in the church believed the day of the Lord had already come, which disturbed many of them. Here in chapter 5 of his letter, he points out that the day of the Lord will come just like a thief in the night, which means no one knows the times and epochs with regard to that event. What we do know is that when they are saying peace and safety, then destruction will come upon them suddenly like labor pains upon a woman with child, and they will not escape. This idea is consistent with Jesus' teaching concerning the end times, specifically concerning what he called the days of the Son of Man. In that body of teaching, he describes an event that will take place without warning, which means that his followers must always be vigilant and be on the alert. Paul says the same thing here, painting a brief picture of what that looks like. First, he tells them that they are not in the dark, that the day should overtake them like a thief. Whether the Bible reveals the times and epochs or not, it's not left up to us to figure things out. We don't need to know what will happen in the future because we are preparing ourselves for whatever might happen. We are sons of the light, sons of the day, meaning we spend our time learning and believing the truth, reminding others of what is true, and dedicating ourselves to acknowledging the hard, sober truth whenever we hear it. At this point, I would like to present an alternative interpretation of Jesus' teaching on the Second Advent, which is an extrapolation of everything I think I have learned concerning the end times. I offer this for your consideration with a caution that I might be wrong, and maintaining my option to change my mind if I should come to find more information. Each man and woman among the church must become convinced in his or her own mind and study things out themselves. And I'm not suggesting that a study of the end times is essential. Paul already pointed out that we already have everything we need as children who walk in the light without knowing anything about the times and the epochs. Just remain sober and vigilant and be on the alert at all times. Having said all that, I begin with the chart on the screen, which gives us a structural framework on which to build our picture. I want to argue that Jesus references 2 episodes, not just one, when people take flight from Jerusalem. He also references an episode when people are gathered together in the air involuntarily without time to make a choice. Here we show a timeline depicted as a solid line along the bottom, which begins with the cross of Christ at the left and continues into eternity to the right. The millennial period is shown as a green rectangle, which represents a 1,000-year period during which Christ co-rules with his followers over the earth. The rest of the chart intends to display 3 different times when the group of people take flight. On the left, we show a vertical line just after the cross labeled Flight from Jerusalem 70 AD, indicating a moment in history when some of the residents of Jerusalem fled the city in haste before the armies of Titus surrounded and laid siege to that city. After that, Jesus says there will be a great tribulation, which we have marked Great Tribulation period just above the line. Next, we have a vertical line just about in the middle, indicating the rapture of the church. Following that, we show a short duration of time during which those Hebrews who fear the Lord and hear the call will make the final pilgrimage to the temple in Jerusalem. 3 times during the year, ancient Hebrews made a pilgrimage to the temple in Jerusalem as commanded by the Torah in order to celebrate one of the 3 major festivals of Judaism: Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles. I'm proposing that these celebrations served as a dry run for a more significant and important pilgrimage in Israel's future. More about this in subsequent videos. Finally, those Hebrews who have made the final pilgrimage to Jerusalem and under threat from the final beast must escape Jerusalem to the Mount of Olives, where they will meet Jesus face to face. This event takes place just before the millennial period, as indicated by the label Escape to the Mount of Olives. In Matthew's Gospel, Jesus addresses the destruction of the temple and presents his extensive teaching concerning the end times. Someday in his future, our past, the residents of Jerusalem will need to react quickly to the presence of an abomination of desolation. He lists a couple of prudent actions to take in order to escape the city of Jerusalem before the Roman armies come to surround the city and lay siege to it. One might be on the housetop when he sees the armies coming, and in order to save his life, he must not go down to remove his goods from the house. Another person might be out working in the field when he sees the armies coming, and that man should not turn back and enter the city. Those who hesitate will lose their life. Those who act quickly will save their life. On the other hand, he indicates another event different than the first. In this situation, we have 2 men asleep in bed, unable to sense any danger and unable to react. We have 2 women at a grinding wheel, with no indication of anything wrong. We have 2 men in a field, working just as they always have done. In any case, one is taken while another is left. For many years, I thought Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 17, and Luke 21 were each giving more or less the same information about the same subjects and the same future events. I even figured out a way to harmonize them together. Now, after further study and examination, I have changed my mind. I believe that Luke 17 is mainly centered on our future, and in order to explain this better, I created the chart you see on the screen. In the past few videos, we have been looking at Luke chapter 17, wherein Jesus gives a brief dissertation on his prophecies concerning the end times. In that chapter, Jesus describes the conditions and situations surrounding the coming days of the Son of Man, unlike the Olivet Discourse, which is mainly centered on the days of Great Tribulation. Here we show 3 columns labeled Episode 1, Episode 2, and Episode 3, with a question mark after 3, since we are dealing with my proposed hypothesis. By the time we are finished, I hope to show that each one of these episodes is a different situation, which necessitates different actions to be taken. For each episode, the cautionary advice is different, and for each episode, the conditions by which to evaluate the situation is also different. Episode 1 is found in each one of the Synoptic Gospels at the beginning of the Olivet Discourse. For instance, "Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Whoever is on the housetop must not go down to get the things out that are in his house. Whoever is in the field must not turn back to get his cloak." Jesus addresses the destruction of the temple, offering the signal event when the city will be in danger. I'm calling this event Episode 1. The situation is evident when the residents of Jerusalem see the abomination of desolation, abbreviated here as AOD, is found standing in the holy place. Under the category prudent action, we see 2 actions that Jesus recommends. Whoever is on the housetop must not go down to get the things that are in his house, and whoever is in the field must not turn back to get his cloak. Under cautionary advice, Jesus recommends that the residents of the city pray that their flight will not be in the winter or on the Sabbath. Under conditions, we have listed the circumstances affecting the way in which people will need to react with regard to their safety and well-being. Jesus' advice is predicated on the fact that those living in the city have the ability to act at one's own discretion. The AOD is the alarm or the signal when to leave. One is to leave in haste. Between the day Jesus presented the discourse to his disciples and the day Titus appeared in Judea, one has time to pray for better conditions. When the time comes, one must flee to the mountains. Episode 2 is the rapture of the church, which looks much different than Episode 1. First, let's take a look at the passage from Matthew 24 to see how similar it is with Luke 17. "But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone. For the coming of the Son of Man will be just like the days of Noah. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark, and they did not understand until the flood came and took them all away. So will the coming of the Son of Man be. Then there will be 2 men in the field, one will be taken, and one will be left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken, and one will be left." Notice that the focus of the discourse has shifted away from the Great Tribulation and toward the coming of the Son of Man. And that phrase, Son of Man, has special meaning with regard to the coming of Jesus to receive an everlasting dominion. Since we know that an everlasting dominion was not given to Jesus during the 1st century, when the temple was destroyed, we see the center of focus move to the Second Advent. Luke 17 is primarily focused on the days of the Son of Man, and just as we might expect, that passage contains similar language. Luke 17 covers Episode 2 and Episode 3. Matthew 24 and Luke 17 share Episode 2 in common, but I propose that Episode 3, which is very similar to Episode 1, is uniquely different. The challenge for our understanding in my presentation here, however, is the fact that Episode 2 and Episode 3 are woven together in the text of Luke 17. This requires that we sort through the text looking for logical connections and associations. I've done that already, and for this reason, I'm going to work with the chart instead of the actual text. Unlike Episode 1, which takes place during the Jewish-Roman Wars of 70 AD, Episode 2 takes place the day that the Son of Man is revealed. During that time period, sometime in our future, there will be two in one bed, one will be taken and the other will be left. There will be two women grinding at the same place, one will be taken and the other will be left. The only prudent action Jesus recommends is, be on the alert at all times. In this case, there is very little, if anything, one can do with regard to their safety and well-being, other than to take Jesus' advice and be on the alert at all times. Beyond that, those who are taken and those who are left had no significant influence on the decision. The situation involves an involuntary removal of a sleeping man and a working woman. No conditions or state of affairs exist that requires quick, prompt action on their part. The day of departure is just like any other day. Jesus gives no warning sign or alarm that might benefit them. Episode 3 is similar to Episode 1, except, and this is very important, Episode 3 takes place the day that the Son of Man is revealed. As we have said, Episode 1 takes place during the Jewish-Roman Wars of 70 AD, which has already come and gone. The day that the Son of Man is revealed is still in our future, so Episode 3 must also still be in our future. Notice here in Luke 17, there is no mention of Jerusalem. On that day, the one who is on the housetop and whose goods are in the house must not go down to take them out. This will be good advice regardless of where the house is located. These houses aren't necessarily located in Jerusalem. They might also be located anywhere else in Israel. One house might be located in Tel Aviv, another in Haifa, another in Nazareth or Beersheba. The point is, no matter where your house is, you need to leave the area. The one who is in the field must not enter the house to grab a few things. Remember Lot's wife? Jesus says, the story of Lot's wife remains a cautionary tale about a woman who hesitated and lost her life. A time might come when we will be asked to give up everything save the shirt on our backs, and if that time should arrive, we must not follow her example. Lot's wife made the wrong choice. Don't make the same choice she did. Unlike Episode 2, where the difference between the taken and the left is involuntary, here in Episode 3, each person has the ability to act at one's own discretion. Each individual is required to weigh the relative value of things against one's own existence. The choice to leave is made during an existential crisis. Those who are not willing to abandon things will perish. This would be a good time to take my shot at the riddle of the body and the vultures. I believe Jesus is drawing a comparison between a time in Israel's future and carrion birds seen gathering around a dead body. At that time, Israel will be like a dead body, and her enemies will gather around her. Reference Ezekiel 37. This time period is mentioned by more than one prophet, but the most striking image comes from the book of Joel, chapter 3, where we hear God summon Israel's enemies to gather at the place symbolically called the Valley of Decision, where the Lord will judge them there. And the question to be decided is this: is Yahweh God Almighty or not? It is no coincidence that the vulture metaphor appears in the same context as the lightning metaphor. We are to understand, I think, that the gathering of Jesus' followers to meet the Lord in the air takes place concurrently with the gathering of Israel's enemies in the Valley of Decision. One takes place in the air, while the other takes place on the ground. Both take place at the same time, and both display the awesome power and glory of God. In conclusion, for those interested in a review of the actual text of Luke 17, please watch the second part of this three-part series, Noah and Lot, a retrospective. There will be a link in the comment section below. According to the Encyclopedia Britannica, on the 9th of the month of Av, August 29, in AD 70, Jerusalem fell. The temple was burned, and the Jewish state collapsed, although the fortress of Masada was not conquered by the Roman general Flavius Silva until April 73. 40 years earlier, Jesus foretold this event, warning his followers to flee the city with great haste and escape to the mountains. This marks the beginning of a very lengthy time of tribulation, not only for the Jewish people, but for all those who call upon the name of the Lord. That was episode 1. Episode 2 is the harpazo, the taking of a great multitude which no one could count from every nation and all tribes and peoples and tongues, to stand before the throne and before the Lamb of God in heaven. The great tribulation is over. The day of the Lord is about to begin. And finally, episode 3, still in our future. The Hebrew people will be called to make the final pilgrimage to the city of Jerusalem. Those who make the trip join with the rest of Israel in a time of prayer and fasting, pleading with God to save his people from their enemies, that they might serve him in peace, will survive the battle of Armageddon. Lord willing, we will explore episode 3 in further detail. For now, I hope you enjoyed this video and found it helpful to your own studies. If you did, please click like and subscribe. Thank you for watching.